Welcome to Sword and Shield, the official podcast of the 960th Cyberspace Wing. Join us for insight, knowledge, mentorship, and some fun as we discuss relevant topics in and around our wing. Please understand that the views expressed in this podcast are not necessarily the views of the U.S. Air Force nor the Air Force Reserve, and no endorsement of any particular person or business is ever intended.
Welcome to Sword and Shield Podcast. I'm Colonel Rick Erredge, 960th Cyberspace Wing Commander, and today we've got a very special guest. With us, we have 16th Air Force Commander, General Kennedy. Sir, welcome.
Thanks, Rick. Appreciate it. Excited to be here. Looking forward to the podcast.
Yeah, it's going to be a great opportunity here for to introduce you to our wing and to our listeners out there. And we're excited to host you today and have you learn a little bit about who we are, and then obviously learn from you about where you're going as we support all 16th Air Force missions. So those that don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to this point?
Sure, Rick. Happy to do that. So I joined the Air Force, 16th Air Force, back in July after a change of command with Lieutenant General Hawk as he went up to become the Deputy Commander up at Cyber Command. Previous to that, I had been the Director of Operations at J3 at U.S. Cyber Command, doing that mission with General Nakasone for about 2 years, almost exactly 2 years up there. Prior to that, I'd had a series of jobs in the Pentagon as a general officer in the Air Force cyber enterprise, whether it was on the CIO staff, on the 826 staff, or in the OSD staff, also working in the CIO there. Working both and IT policy kind of questions as well as cyber operations questions and policy, force structure alignment, and working policy and the Hill on cyber, Air Force cyber, and that would be total force cyber, so questions that we would get about the Air Force Reserves and the Air National Guard and the contributions to the cyber enterprise for the Air Force. So that's what I did. Prior to that, I was a bomber pilot and worked strategy jobs for 25 years. And so that's what I did in the Air Force. I flew the B-1 primarily out of Ellsworth. Had the standard jobs there, got a deployment over to LUD as the Vice Wing Commander there, have about 3,000 hours in the B-1. And one of the unique aspects of this job is it is a flying position, so I do get to fly, and so right now I also get to fly the EC-130. Not as often as I like, which is always the case, but I get to go out there about once a month, maybe every other month to
yeah,
fly.
That's awesome. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
What was that transition like, going from B-1 bomber pilot to cyber? Was that by choice? Was that something you pursued because of interest?
Well, I didn't get that chance to pursue it. So when you make general officer, it is general. So there's a generalist aspect, and often at the 1-star rank, the Air Force looks to put you in a position that's maybe outside of your core specialty. In that case, the vice chief at the time was General Sevey Wilson. He put me in the position of the warfighter integration in the CIO position, which had historically been an aviator that had been in either the mobility air forces or the combat air forces. And the idea was things like AOCs, data links, those sorts of aspects, and also cyber operations fell under there because it was a dual-hatted role with the A3. So I reported to General Raymond and Lieutenant General Bender at the same time in that position. And then usually you return to kind of your specialty. Well, I did not. I went to another cyber job, and then another cyber job, and at that point, I'm pretty much the Air Force had decided to use me in the cyber enterprise across the department, which I'm happy to do it. I have an undergrad in engineering. It's not cyber or computers, but it does help a little bit. But it does. I do really, with my family asks me every day, it's mentally challenging. Before this, even before I had the NAF, and the NAF, when you add our other enterprises to the 16th Air Force NAF, which includes the ISR community, the weather community, EW, and as well as cyber and SIGINT, it's interesting every day.
Yeah, I bet. No, that's awesome. And 16th Air Force is gigantic, so I find it fascinating that there's flying wings inside our business and how we're evolving from IW, IO. What the future looks like. I think the world's in front of us. Tons of opportunity here to connect with the warfighter, and I think we can help in that aspect in some sense. So it's been about 6 months in the seat, so I'm interested in your thoughts. After the first 6 months, what kind of things did you see that surprised you, maybe, or what kind of messaging do you think we're at, and any inflection points?
Right. I don't know if I would call them surprises, but I was really impressed by the the enterprise approach within the NAF for the enterprises that are pretty much self-contained within it. And so whether the weather wing and how that enterprise is, it's a global enterprise that has built synergies across the various aspects. The ISR enterprise, the same. And whether it's the 70th, the 363rd, or the 480th, of how they work together to support every combatant command and all of our CFACs out there. I thought that's really interesting, and how we integrate total force aspects into that. I mean, it really is an enterprise approach that comes together in our NAF, and then we bring them all together in a singular NAF to gain those effects, the IW, information warfare type effects that we can bring to bear. I was really impressed by how far we've come in such a short time. We just turned 3 years old as a 16th Air Force as an IW NAF. We had a history before, but as a pure information warfare NAF, and really building upon how we can gain those synergies without formal command authorities. But the mentality we grow up with, where you have to give me a global fighting unit and then we assign it to a commander, and that's solely how that operates. Well, with the idea of convergence that General Hawk brought into the numbered Air Force, and then how we can use the capabilities, that information, and really provide more value to the CFACs, to the combatant commands, that way, without necessarily having force assignment, alignment, GFMs, and things like that. I mean, we can do more because we're in the same NAF and we're able to establish those types of communities of interest and alignment. So that was really the most impressive. And as we looked across it, if you think through the priorities, it's kind of funny. You probably ran into this when you took over the wing. They hand you the guide on, you hand it back, they post it, and you're walking off the stage, and they ask you, "Sir, what are your priorities?" It's like, yeah. Why don't you give me a sec?
Give me breath.
And so what I did is I talked with our wing commanders and our directors in the first, and we just had an SLS with your vice came and attended with us, and decided that the 5 priorities that I've set for the NAF, and the first one being to grow our readiness. Aligns with the chief and the secretary. It's across all of our aspects of the Air Force community to make sure that we are ready for what is always the question asked, and ready really for what we see as the pacing challenge, which is a PRC that's looking to shape the world structure in a way that's that's advantageous to them and disadvantage us. And also the acute threat right now that we see in Russia as the 2 primary things as we're done. So we need to find and grow our readiness. And for enterprises that are generally all in, how do we find that time in there to enable us to grow some skills that we might not use every day, but that we think we will be needed in a crisis or conflict, primarily in Indo-PACOM AOR. The next one, as we're thinking, how do we strengthen the resilience of our force? This is our human aspect of that, as we have all of the pandemic continues to resonate across the nation and has left definite fingerprints on our force. But also, how do we build our resilience of our systems? How do we build the resilience of our processes, our continuity of operations, as we think through a more contentious operating environment than we're used to in the previous 2 decades? How do we build in that resilience of our capabilities as well, not just our personal resilience? The third one is maturing information warfare. We were put together in the same numbered Air Force for a reason. And so how do we pull those and gain more value, and how do we generate those outcomes for the CFACs that are aligned to the various combatant commands? And this is, again, I don't think a force present. We started with kind of a thought on a force presentation model, and that might be a thing eventually, but I don't think we're there yet. We're not going to present, if you're the CFAC over in CENTCOM, I'm not presenting you IW in a box, right? So we got to think through, how do we build a community of interest approach that we help, as we have the core expertise for the Air Force in our NAF, how do we build that forward and then partner? And that's one of the things we'll be working on as one of our priorities. The next one is driving modernization. This isn't just airframes or weapon systems. This is also processes. As we're thinking through, and talent management, how do we modernize the aspects of our NAF? And as we're thinking through that, and the bigger one is when we're talking about talent management and this is one of the aspects here that really applies to your wing, is how do I think a balanced capability has aspects of the total force and variance level, and aspects of enlisted personnel, officers, and civilians, and figuring out what is the way in that 3x3 kind of matrix of how we have individuals ready to serve in the way that they can serve and capture that expertise. Because we all love to serve the nation. At some point, things, either we age out, which I will here eventually, but how do we break down barriers and have categories or means of service that enable people to stay as long as they are able to? And then finally, it's all about increasing our combat effectiveness. That's why we wear the uniform. It's about defending the nation and our interests, and making sure that everything we're doing is really going toward that end. So that's kind of my first 6 months working really closely. I at my level, I think it's really important to create the environment, enable the wings to get the missions that they've been assigned, and figure out how we can then provide them that visions and then let them get out of their way.
Yeah, I think that's great. I really resonate with those. Those are the same things we think about all the time. It's really nice. We try to stay aligned with you and with 10th Air Force and Air Force Reserve Command. All that's kind of nested. Like, I feel like in my career, I've never felt like being in an organization that's been so aligned all the way up to the SECAF about where we're headed. And so it's really exciting there. Obviously, we're all about readiness. We're trying to provide that strategic depth and operational effectiveness for you. We are also trying to mature. So the wing is, we just had our 4th birthday, so we're a little bit older than you.
Right.
I say we're a toddler that thinks they're a teenager, and so we're trying to find our way as well. And your staff and the 16th Air Force team, previous to you, was super helpful in bringing us along. Sometimes willingly, sometimes dragging us, which is what we needed at the time. So we look forward to continue that relationship as well. From a readiness perspective, we really feel like I tried to focus on family readiness and resiliency and kind of bundle those together. Because as a reservist, you got to step away from civilian employer maybe. Your family has to be supportive of that. Sometimes they don't understand about why do I lose you one weekend every month? We got stuff going on here. And so really excited to see that, there's things there I think that we can help you with and that we want to be able to stay synced with you as well. And from the readiness perspective, where do you see us fitting in, and where do you need kind of more from us? I know we have the conversation today is the first start with you and the staff, but I think we need to do a better job of making sure 16th Air Force understands where we fit in and how you can access us, and we'll have a bigger discussion about how that access works and where we need some help there. So your thoughts on where kind of AFRC or maybe just a total force in general, where we can help with those priorities, where we fit in.
Yeah, that's good, Rick. I want to, before I address that directly, your mention about family resilience is something when Chief Bruce and I rotate through the command, that's one thing that he always highlights too, is it's really, we talk about the airmen, whether that's civilian, officer, enlisted, their personal resilience, but a lot of it is the structure and support for the family that enables their service and makes them more resilient too. So I think that's a really good point. As far as your comment about strategic depth, that is a good one. But it's interesting to me. I'm not sure it's not a break glass and use in time of war, because in information warfare, it's very much, we're the competition force, our numbered air force. That includes your wing as well.
Sir.
And so we are going to be active in competition, which is the predominant time if you put everything out. You have crises that come up, and then occasionally you'll have conflict, hopefully short duration and comes out to our ends. But we're going to spend a lot of time in competition, the majority of it. And so how we posture ourselves to have that operations tempo that we can operate at a fairly high battle rhythm, but not burn ourselves out. And that's really where we look for this opportunity. When we're talking about readiness, is how do we build the time to do those things that I don't do in competition? It works really well. I was a bomber pilot. That's an easy paradigm to work through. We go to flags, we do these sorts of things. And so we're looking through, okay, when we have IW ranges like Plata's range out in New Mexico, how do we integrate forces in there? How do we work with total force there that might have some capabilities that you bring that we may not be witting of? I think that's the other aspect too. Where there's aspects in the Air Force Reserve that we may not know about that could help us bring into that competition space that we would be able to. And then when you think through, think in an innovative manner of lots of reserve units all about the Grove and other enterprises like the mobility air forces and things. Well, how can we integrate that availability and those access to understand what the background behavior and the environment is? So when we go into crisis and conflict, we understand what's the baseline. Now we can understand what's different, and then we can understand the adversary. It's all about understanding the adversary. And when you think about information warfare, it's a dominant activity, like I mentioned, in competition. When you go into crisis, it's the critical activity. I've been in the rooms of decision making. They want to know what's the adversary doing and why, and what can we do, and how. And if we don't have that baseline understanding, we're not going to be there. And then once we get into a conflict and kinetic effects start occurring on a battlefield, we become a critical enabler at that point. We're not necessarily the dominant activity. We're not necessarily the most critical activity, but we are the enabler to make those more effective and to help us hopefully manage the escalation of the activity to a place to our advantage and move back toward a crisis slash status quo competition phase.
Yeah, I think that's important, and I probably haven't done a good enough job with my leadership inside of A4C of talking about that from that sense about where we fit in, that you need access to these capabilities all the time. Like like you said, we're very mobility centric in AFRC, so they understand like we're going to train a pilot, a crew to be ready to go when I need you, and whether that's a rotation for 6 months from now, but you need us when you need us. Like you need us, something happens, an incident, you need us now. And so we're really trying to work through like how that makes sense from a reserve or part-time force perspective and how you get us when you need us. We believe our strategic advantages are traditional reservists bringing that civilian expertise from whatever company or field they're in, bringing that to the fight as well. It's something that you don't know you have, right? It's a capability that we say we use, but we probably don't use it as effectively as we can. And I remember you and I had a conversation. I don't know if you remember it, but you were the CFM at the time. You called me when I was at the AFRC as the CFM and said, right. Hey, I need a reservist in a country in Europe on Monday that has experience with semantic. Go find somebody. I'm like, okay. And I went, bro network, we got to do better to when that need comes up that we have somebody on the shelf to go, okay, we know how to get hold of this person. They're available. They're on mission. Here you go. And so that's kind of how I feel like we can fit and help fill those gaps and seams for you and be an effective warfighter.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good way to think about it, Rick.
And so as you think about the next, so I saw your here's my assessment after 90 days. That was super helpful. As you think about the next year, 2 years, that tour, like where do you see the team going? And are there any big rocks on the horizon?
Yeah, the biggest thing, in the next, 2 years out as the NAF and the other CFACs, the CFACs and the other folks supporting the combatant commands, really understanding what we 16th Air Force can bring to them and how if we built that community interest in IW and we're really working toward generating competition effects that enable them to be better postured for crisis and conflict, but also gain strategic advantage and decision advantage for their missions in support of the command commands. And how do we do that? That's really what, having that understanding that General Grinkowicz, who's out at, the CFAC out in CENTCOM right now, would come up and say, I got this thing, I know exactly who to call. They reach out to the 616th OC, we get the experts together, and we can help them through it. That would be win. And it goes for every CFAC, as it goes across, whether it's supporting Southcom or supporting Northcom or any of the other ones as we go. So that would be in the IW case on that. The other one is the readiness. We still have readiness challenges across our enterprises. The cyber one's particularly acute, and hopefully have achieved our readiness levels that we're looking for on that as we still, it's largely a talent management, but it's also really a training issue as we go forward. There's a retention aspect and there's a training aspect of that readiness challenge that we continue to need to focus on, and we'll be thinking through a few things there.
So from your experience at Cybercom, I'm interested, a little bit off script here, but I'm just interested in your experience, your previous job. Where's the Air Force kind of fit in the training piece and the readiness piece with the other services? How are we doing? Are we doing better than the other ones? Are we average? Are we way behind?
Yeah, there's airmen all over the enterprise and doing really well. As far as the training pipeline, I'd say we're doing well in most cases. The services have their unique aspects that enable them to do things sometimes better than others. The the Army can mass on something,
sure,
and they can get numbers as we're going forward. We're good at training pipelines and getting folks through, but in a more deliberate manner. I think we've shown that in the enterprise as we go on that. So I think relative to the other, we're in a good place.
Okay.
I don't want to compare one versus
sure.
the other because there's always unique aspects to it. The Marine Corps is a smaller shot group. The ability to focus on that. Where we're going on the services is I know that Cyber Command is looking for us to have across the four services of some sort of baseline coming out of initial qualification training that's more, we're pushing as much left so that the airman that comes out of the basic, AFSC granting school has a higher, has a standard level of employment. I'd love to be able to take them and they are now basic level,
right
whatever
away.
Their work role. That's the challenge is we have Air Force, we have macro level processes to drive manning and do those things, but we in cyber have a micro level work role need to man our teams and to organize that way. So we're getting better on that, and I think our aspects of JCC, Joint Cyber Command and Control, and as as part of the Joint Cyber Warfighting Architecture comes in, and our ability to really understand what Colonel Erredge is qualified in. To your point on, got expertise in Symantec, has been on X amount of missions in country X, and then that's the person that we can get, because it is person specific in cyber more than B1 pilot.
Sure.
As we're going for.
Yeah, that's exciting, and I think we have those same struggles obviously in the micro level, and when the denominator gets really small, it gets really hard for us to be able to deliver that capability you need at scale.
Right.
That makes sense, and so we are tied in with your folks, and we're on the readiness panels, the readiness training review stuff, and so we're actually doing our own cyber training pipeline. We'll tell you a little bit about later, but we're trying to do a CPI, the black belt level event, about how to make our training pipeline more efficient, from getting somebody off the street and then getting them through IQT. Like, there's so many administrative processes that reservists have to do that your regular Air Force folks don't have to do, that I think we're not helping ourselves out. So we're trying to smooth that out and then plug into the Air Force or the Cybercom training pipeline in a way that's efficient as possible, so we spit them out and put them on mission.
Fantastic.
So we see that. Well, any closing thoughts here as we wrap up? Any messages to our gladiators?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here today. I do enjoy coming out and meeting folks in the enterprise and talking about missions that we're all passionate about. I do want to close, and when I think of the Air Force Reserve and your aspects to it, to be a healthy enterprise, like I said earlier, is we need to have a strong relationship and places that airmen can serve in things that might be unique to their personal situation. And that's why, if our partnership continues on, and we can make sure we capture the talent, because it is a very, all war is a human activity, but in our IW skills, whether it's someone focused on the IO, EW, ISR, or cyber, we put a lot of resource in training the individual. And as much as we can give them the ability to serve and the longevity of a career, whether it's active, guard, reserve, doesn't matter to me, as long as they can, we want to continue to have them as part of the environment, because it makes us stronger, and it makes our nation stronger when we have folks that serve in civilian sector that bring some of their knowledge and expertise to that side as well, because that is one of the areas, not directly a DoD mission, but the cyber vulnerabilities specifically into our infrastructure in the nation and in our various critical sectors. CISA can only do so much. It's going to have to be an industry sector specific solution as we go in there, and as many airmen we can put in that, I think, would be productive.
Yes, sir. Excellent. Thanks again for your time. We'll look forward to the continued partnership.
All right. Thanks, Rick. Looking forward to it.